My husband told me he was going to Dubai for a year to manage the construction of a massive suspension bridge. I secretly tracked his geolocation and found him in a VIP maternity ward, doting on a pregnant young woman. I returned home, sold our $3 million riverfront mansion, abandoned my paralyzed mother-in-law, and left the country. A year later, when my husband brought his mistress and their baby back to what he thought was his home, he was paralyzed by what he found. A fine drizzle misted against the towering windows of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, cloaking everything in a gray, dismal haze that perfectly matched my mood. The indifferent voice of the PA announcer calling flights blended with the hurried footsteps of people rushing by. Vance stood opposite me, popping the collar of his trench coat. His handsome face projected determination, but a calculated sadness lingered in his eyes. He took my hand, the warm hand I had trusted him with for the past 8 years, and spoke in that low, velvet voice of his. "Just bear with it for a year, honey. This trip is for our future, for our family. The Dubai Bridge project is critical. When I finish it, I'll be in line for the regional VP spot. Then we'll never have to worry about a thing again." I forced a smile, swallowing the tears pricking my eyes, and smoothed his lapel. In our 12 years together, from the days we started with nothing to our current wealth, we had never been apart for this long. Vance pulled a sleek black debit card from his wallet, pressed it into my palm, and carefully instructed me. "There's $50,000 on this. The PIN is our anniversary. Use it for your expenses, groceries, and Beatrice's medications. My mother is paralyzed on her left side now, and her temper is unpredictable. Just be patient with her, please. The time zone is crazy, but I'll try to FaceTime as often as I can." I nodded, gripping the card as if clinging to his promise. "Don't worry, just focus on work. I'll handle everything at home. I'll take good care of Beatrice." Vance kissed me lightly on the forehead. It was a hurried peck, but enough to make my chest tighten. He turned and strode toward the TSA security checkpoint. His tall silhouette gradually dissolved into the sea of travelers. I stood rooted to the spot for a long time, staring at the departure board, silently praying for his safety overseas. That night, I returned to our sprawling riverfront estate on Mercer Island. It felt terrifyingly empty and quiet. The rain drumming against the gutters sounded like the night itself was sighing. This house was once our ultimate pride, the fruit of our blood, sweat, and tears from our younger years. Now, lacking its master's warmth, it felt vast and incredibly cold. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, lay in the first-floor guest suite. Her steady snoring was interrupted by groans from her aching joints. 3 months ago, she suffered a massive stroke that paralyzed the left side of her body. Her entire life now depended on me and a visiting home health aide. Seeing her tossing and turning, unable to settle, I decided to put on some soft classical music for her, as I usually did. I remembered an old iPad Vance had left behind in the living room credenza. The battery was fully charged. Swiping to unlock the screen, I was about to open Spotify when my finger accidentally brushed the Find My icon, the green radar pulsing to life. Vance and I had shared an iCloud family account since the early days to sync our photos and calendars. We never broke the habit because we had absolute trust in each other. A map populated the screen. The blue dot representing my device blinked at our Mercer Island address. Another dot, a green one representing Vance's iPhone, appeared. Logically, Vance should have been halfway across the Atlantic, his phone on airplane mode or turned off. The location should have shown SeaTac Airport as its last known ping. But no, the green dot was glowing brightly, updating in real time, and it wasn't at the airport. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden chill tracing the length of my spine. I rubbed my eyes and zoomed in, telling myself it had to be a GPS glitch or a cellular error. But no matter how many times I refreshed the app, the green dot stubbornly held its position about 20 miles away, just across the water in Bellevue. To be precise, the dot was hovering directly over the address of a highly exclusive, notoriously expensive private maternity and women's hospital. Flight EK-230 to Dubai had already taken off, carrying my longing and my hopes for the man building our future. Yet my husband, who was supposed to be on that Boeing 777, was currently transmitting a signal from a labor and delivery ward in our own state. I sat frozen on the sofa all night, gripping the iPad until my knuckles turned white. The wind howling through the window frames sounded like fate mocking me. Had the satellite made a mistake? Was technology flawed? Or was my entire life a lie? 1,000 excuses raced through my mind. Maybe he left his phone in a colleague's car. Maybe he missed his flight due to a medical emergency. But my woman's intuition, that terrifying sixth sense I always tried to suppress, was screaming a much crueler truth. The next morning, I woke with bruised, dark circles under my eyes and a splitting headache. I had spent the night in a restless haze, repeatedly refreshing the iPad. The green dot had finally gone offline around 2 a.m., leaving a gaping question mark in my soul. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, my phone buzzed. An iMessage from Vance. Just a short text. Landed in Dubai. Everything is great. Miss you, wifey. It's insanely hot, but the AC in the hotel is freezing. Connection is spotty. Going to sleep off the J, and I'll call you later. Love you. Attached was a photo of a cup of black coffee on a sleek wooden table, with a foggy, modern skyline out the window. Any other day, I would have smiled, elated, and typed back a paragraph of loving words. But today, staring at this image, all I saw was a meticulously staged lie. I zoomed in on the photo to the absolute limit, scrutinizing every pixel. There, reflected in the curved glass of the coffee cup, was the blurred outline of an electrical outlet. It was a standard American 120-volt, 3-prong outlet, 2 flat slits, and a round grounding hole. Dubai uses the chunky, rectangular British-style Type G plugs. He was a good actor, meticulously preparing his props to deceive his loyal wife. But he slipped up on the details. I suppressed a gasp, shoved the phone into my apron pocket, and carried a tray of oatmeal and tea upstairs. Beatrice was already awake, lying on her side, watching the morning news. Seeing me, she scowled and snapped. "What took you so long? Trying to starve an old woman to death?" "Move it, it's time for my pills." I carefully set the tray on her overbed table, helped her sit up against the pillows, and kept my voice even. "I cooked the oats a bit longer so they'd be softer for you to swallow. How did you sleep, Beatrice?" Beatrice scoffed, glaring at me out of the corner of her eye. "Sleep? My whole body aches. Vance is working himself to the bone to keep a roof over our heads, and look at you losing your mind from having it too easy. Walking around with a sour face like someone died. Take proper care of me so he can focus on his job." I scooped a spoonful of oatmeal, blew on it, and brought it to her mouth. As she chewed, I asked casually, "Vance is gone for such a long time this trip. I'm just worried. Do you happen to have the number of any of his project managers? Just in case I need to reach him in an emergency?" Beatrice froze mid-swallow. Her eyes darted wildly, refusing to meet mine, and then she lashed out. "What's wrong with you? Where your husband goes and what he does is his business. Why are you asking me? He's doing important work. Don't go calling and distracting him. Just go to the pharmacy and buy me more of those expensive vitamins." The last batch did nothing. Her evasiveness and unusually defensive reaction only solidified my suspicions. She knew something. Either she was hiding it from me, or worse, actively covering for her son. After lunch, I called the home health aide and asked her to come watch Beatrice for the afternoon, claiming I needed to go to church to light a candle for Vance's safe travels. Hearing I was going to pray for her son, Beatrice softened instantly and stopped her nagging. I got into my old Subaru, the car I'd kept since my college days, and drove out into the miserable weather. I drove from memory, following the GPS coordinates from last night, pulling into the sprawling, manicured grounds of the Bellevue Medical Center. It looked more like a 5-star resort than a hospital. I roamed the visitor parking garage, my eyes scanning for the one thing I both desperately wanted and dreaded to see. And there it was. Tucked in a secluded VIP parking spot beneath a row of cedar trees, my heart was seized in an invisible fist. It was a gleaming black Range Rover with a vanity plate Vance had paid a premium for. The car he cherished like a child. The car he told me he was leaving in his best friend's climate-controlled garage for the entire year so the engine wouldn't seize up. I walked closer, my legs feeling like lead, and touched the hood. The cold metal sent a shock through my skin. Glancing through the passenger window, I saw a plush pink neck pillow shaped like a cat. It was a cutesy, juvenile thing Vance would never buy for me, and certainly would never use himself. The flight to Dubai was a clumsy theatrical production, and my husband hadn't gone anywhere. He was here, right across the lake, living in a parallel universe I knew nothing about. The chill of the parking garage seeped into my bones. I pulled the brim of my baseball cap down, adjusted my medical mask to cover most of my face, leaving only my bloodshot, sleep-deprived eyes visible. I walked toward the elevators, the squeak of my sneakers on the concrete echoing too loudly. I squeezed into the elevator alongside a group of scrub-clad nurses, pushing a medication cart, trying to shrink into the corner. The digital display blinked 4 and chimed. The doors parted, and the sterile smell of bleach was replaced by a faint, luxurious scent of lemongrass. The VIP maternity wing was carpeted in plush charcoal, so quiet I could hear the blood roaring in my own ears. Following the floor plan in my head, I tiptoed toward room 405 at the end of the hall. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling into the corridor along with the muffled sounds of a reality TV show. Holding my breath, I pressed my back against the wall and peered through the crack. What I saw inside was a ruthless, jagged knife plunging straight into my chest, shredding every ounce of faith and hope I had ever harbored. Propped up on crisp white hospital pillows was a young woman with voluminous, highlighted hair. Her face was plump and glowing. She wore a silk designer pajama set, her heavily pregnant belly protruding beneath the thin fabric. Sitting on the edge of the bed was Vance, my husband. The man who had held me at the airport yesterday swearing our future was in the Middle East, was meticulously peeling an apple. His movements were incredibly slow and tender. In our 12 years together, I had never seen him do anything remotely like this. He brought a slice of apple to her lips, gazing at her with absolute adoration, the exact look I thought belonged exclusively to me on our wedding day. The girl playfully swatted his hand away, her voice dripping in honey. I don't want an apple. I want the truffle mac and cheese from that place downtown. And why did you have to leave her all that money? Did that old hag suspect anything? What if she finds out you aren't in Dubai, but here with me and our baby? Vance chuckled. His familiar, deep laugh now sounded demonic. He set the plate down, stroked her hair, and sneered. Don't worry about her. Calliope is an idiot. She does whatever I tell her. I tossed her 50 grand and her eyes lit up. Right now, she's up to her neck, wiping my mother's drool. Where would she find the time to spy on me? Just rest and take care of yourself, Bryn. This boy is my heir. He's the most important thing in the world. I stood outside the door, paralyzed, clamping both hands over my mouth to stifle a sob. In his eyes, I was just a stupid old hag. A high-class maid paid with the very money I had helped him earn. I remembered clipping coupons, wearing the same winter coat for 5 years, skipping lunches just so he could seed his first startup. I sacrificed my 20s so he could reach the top. And now, he was using my sacrifices to fund a second nest, a younger woman, and the child I had prayed for my whole life, but could never conceive. But you promised, Bryn whined, rubbing her belly. Once I deliver, you're making us official. I don't want to be a secret anymore. My son needs a real father. Vance leaned in and kissed her forehead. His voice was resolute. Of course, baby. Just wait until I get her to sign over the deed to that Montana acreage her parents left her. Then I'll throw her out. The Mercer Island house will be ours. You can renovate it however you want. Every word was a sledgehammer to my skull, shattering the last remnants of my sanity. I wanted to kick the door open, to scream, to claw at his face, to drag them out into the hallway and expose this monster to the world. But my feet felt fused to the carpet. I couldn't move. I caught my reflection in the corridor window. A woman in her late 30s, dressed in faded jeans and a baggy sweater, dark bags under her anxious eyes. Compared to the blooming, pampered mistress inside, I looked like a total failure. Oddly enough, I didn't cry. Standing mere feet away from my husband, whispering sweet nothings to his pregnant mistress, I didn't shed a single tear. I only felt an overwhelming, acidic disgust. The ticket to Dubai was a one-way ticket out of my naive paradise and into a hell where human callousness was colder than ice. I turned and walked swiftly toward the elevator, leaving behind the partially open door of room 405 and the filthy secrets of a rotting marriage. I drove out of the hospital parking lot, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, but my mind was clearing with terrifying speed. I didn't go straight home. I pulled into a dimly lit Starbucks, picking a table in the darkest corner. I took out my phone and dialed Thane. He was my best friend from college, a brilliant tech guy who now ran a high-end private investigation and cybersecurity firm in downtown Seattle. Hearing my fractured voice, Thane didn't ask questions. He just told me to send the GPS coordinates and whatever info I had, promising to jump on it immediately. I texted him Vance's license plate, Bryn's name from the whiteboard in her room, and the hospital address. Part of me was still praying this was all a hallucination. By late afternoon, as I sat staring blankly at the cold dregs of my coffee, my phone buzzed with an encrypted email. The subject line, Case 1, Urgent. Sender, Thane. I took a deep breath and tapped the screen. A massive PDF downloaded. What unfolded before my eyes was a detailed dossier that made my blood run cold. This wasn't a fling. Vance had meticulously engineered an entire second life behind my back. According to Thane's report, Vance had been leasing a luxury penthouse condo for Bryn in downtown Bellevue for 2 years. It was the exact building I had begged him to look at when we were house hunting. But he dismissed it, claiming the HOA fees were a waste of money. Turns out, he didn't mind the money. He just didn't want to spend it on me. The lease was in Vance's name, signed for 5 years, paid biannually. Attached were bank statements from an offshore account I never knew existed. Every 15th of the month, Vance transferred $5,000 to Bryn labeled living expenses. The number mocked the $50,000 he left me to run an entire household and pay for his mother's specialized medical care for a year. With me, he haggled over the grocery bill. With his mistress, he hemorrhaged cash. I scrolled down to surveillance photos Thane had pulled. Vance in a polo and shorts, carrying grocery bags alongside Bryn at Whole Foods. He was laughing, looking like the ultimate relaxed family man. In another, they were picking out baby clothes at a high-end boutique. Vance was holding tiny leather moccasins, his eyes shining with pure joy. Another photo showed him kneeling to tie Bryn's sneakers because her belly made it hard to bend over. Such a tender gesture. When I sprained my ankle last winter and it swelled to the size of a grapefruit, he tossed me a tube of Icy Hot and told me to wrap it myself. All those nights he claimed he was working late, closing deals, networking with investors, he was going back to that penthouse, to a hot dinner and a beautiful young woman. I closed the phone, feeling the oxygen drain from my lungs. This betrayal wasn't just physical. It was a systemic, calculated psychological warfare waged over 2 years. I remembered denying myself new clothes, wearing shoes until the soles wore thin, just so I could buy him a custom-tailored suit for his pitch meetings. My sacrifices were just fuel for his deceit. My phone rang again. It was Thane. His voice was grim, laced with intense worry. Callie, I sent a second file. This one is worse. I dug into Vance's transaction histories and some hidden corporate emails. You need to brace yourself. This isn't just infidelity. This is massive financial fraud. I gripped the phone tightly, my voice turning to frost. Send it. After today, what else could possibly hurt me? I was wrong. Human depravity ran far deeper than I could fathom, and what I was about to learn was far more terrifying than sharing a husband. That night, I arrived home just before midnight. The mansion was swallowed in darkness, save for the amber glow of the nightlight in Beatrice's suite. She was snoring loudly. I crept up the sweeping staircase and headed straight for Vance's home office. He had strictly forbidden me from entering it, citing SEC compliance and confidentiality. But now that he was sleeping soundly next to his mistress, the forbidden door was unlocked. I booted up his desktop. The password prompt appeared. Historically, his password was our anniversary. But I knew that when people change, their numbers change. I tried Bryn's birthday from Thane's dossier. Incorrect. I tried their baby's estimated due date. Incorrect. Suddenly, I remembered the way he looked at her in that hospital bed, the gaze of a blindly obsessed man. I typed Bryn my loved photos and Hugo Fira. The screen flashed, unlocking the gateway to my model husband's hidden empire. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't bother looking for photos or texts. Following Thane's instructions, I bypassed the normal directories and accessed a partitioned hidden drive masked under a folder named System32, Cache. Thane had embedded a backdoor Trojan in a spam email he sent Vance earlier that day, giving me the decryption keys. What I saw made my knees buckle. I grabbed the edge of the mahogany desk to keep from collapsing. This wasn't just about paying rent for Bryn. It was an apocalyptic web of shadow finance. Vance had been heavily day trading offshore crypto options and placing massive illegal sports bets. Rows upon rows of red spreadsheets highlighted negative balances in the millions. His polished, successful tech bro persona was a hollow shell hiding a degenerate gambling addict standing on the edge of a financial abyss. He had borrowed heavily from extremely dangerous, unregulated private lenders, essentially loan sharks. But it wasn't the debt that shattered me. It was how he was trying to cover it. I opened a PDF labeled Collateral. It was a notarized home equity line of credit, HELOC, drawn against a townhouse I owned in a Seattle suburb, my personal premarital asset that I currently rented out. The loan was for $200,000 from a shady LLC. At the bottom was my signature, a perfect, flawless forgery of my handwriting. He had forged a power of attorney to mortgage my blood and sweat to feed his addictions. I scrolled further, a cold sweat breaking across my forehead. There were emails with a sleazy offshore attorney detailing plans to siphon capital, equipment, and client contracts from our jointly owned consulting firm into a new shell corporation. The sole owner of that shell corporation? Bryn. He was bleeding our joint company dry, turning it into a toxic husk riddled with IRS tax liabilities, and pinning all the legal fallout on me, since I was listed as the CFO. "You animal," I hissed through clenched teeth, tears of sheer rage finally spilling over. "You absolute animal." The Dubai trip wasn't just a cover to play house with Bryn. It was a calculated move to hide from creditors closing in on him, and an alibi for when the company officially collapsed. He had orchestrated everything to send his wife to federal prison and bankruptcy, while he rode off into the sunset with a new family and stolen assets. The next morning, I woke up early, forcing my face into a mask of serene ignorance. I called Dr. Aris, our concierge family physician who had treated us for years, and asked him to come for a routine checkup on Beatrice. Dr. Aris was a polite, accommodating man, but possessed a weak spine and a deep fear of malpractice suits. While he was checking Beatrice's blood pressure, I invited him into the living room for coffee. I slid a thick manila envelope across the marble coffee table. Inside were screenshots of text messages I'd pulled from Vance's backup files, showing Dr. Aris receiving massive consulting fee kickbacks for prescribing specific drugs at Vance's request. "Dr. Aris, I know you're a respected man," I began, my voice dangerously calm, fixing him with a dead stare. "But Vance has been acting erratic lately. My mother-in-law is practically comatose half the day. Her cognitive decline is terrifyingly rapid. I highly suspect the medication you prescribed her is the cause." The elderly doctor broke out in an immediate sweat. His hands shook so violently coffee spilled into his saucer. He stammered, "Calliope, I was just following Vance's directives. He told me she was suffering from severe night terrors, that she was inconsolable, and needed heavy sedatives so she wouldn't suffer, and so you guys could sleep." "Heavy sedatives?" I scoffed. "Heavy enough to turn a functioning, albeit paralyzed, woman into a drooling vegetable? You know that if the medical board sees this, you will lose your license and face criminal charges for complicity in poisoning." Dr. Aris went pale as a ghost. He rapidly confessed that Vance had pressured him into prescribing a massive off-label dose of benzodiazepines, strictly forbidden for long-term use in elderly stroke patients, due to the high risk of dementia-like symptoms and respiratory failure. After showing the doctor out with a promise that I would handle things quietly for now, I returned to Beatrice's room. She was in a deep, drug-induced haze, her lips moving in silent mumbles. I gently lifted her head to adjust her pillow. My fingers brushed against something hard and plastic stuffed deep inside the pillowcase. I reached in and pulled out an unlabeled amber pill bottle filled with small, pale blue tablets. This was the stash Vance had secretly handed to the home health aide, ordering her to crush it into Beatrice's evening tea. I stood there holding the bottle, a sickening cocktail of pity and fury churning in my gut. Vance was vicious to his wife, that was one thing. But to drug his own mother, the woman who birthed and raised him, he had turned his mother into a prop, a manufactured, exhausting burden designed to chain me to this house, ensuring I was too drowning in caregiver fatigue to investigate his betrayals. Just then, Beatrice shifted. Her cloudy eyes fluttered open. Because I had skipped her morning dose of vitamins, she was slightly more lucid. She saw the amber bottle in my hand. Panic flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by defensive rage. She tried to heave herself up, her voice raspy but clear. "Give it! Give that back! Those are the special vitamins Vance bought for me. Are you trying to steal them?" I looked down at her with absolute pity. "Beatrice, these aren't vitamins. This is poison. Your son is drugging you into oblivion. Do you even know where he really is right now?" Beatrice clamped her mouth shut, turning her head to avoid my gaze. But then, as if unable to hold back her venom, she spat out a sentence that froze the blood in my veins. "I know he's not in Dubai. He's here, with Bryn. He told me she's carrying his heir." The boy you were too defective to give him. She knew. She knew her son was cheating. She knew about the illegitimate child. She had gladly become an accomplice to my psychological torture. All for the sake of securing a grandson to carry on the family name. Yet, she had no idea her precious golden boy was simultaneously poisoning her to keep his scheme afloat. I set the bottle on the nightstand, staring at the shriveled, bitter woman on the bed. She was just another pawn on Vance's chessboard of ambition. I closed the door to her suite, locking away the gruesome truth I had just unearthed. The unlabeled bottle weighed heavy in my pocket, but it felt even heavier on my soul. I walked up to the master bedroom, once my sanctuary, now a tomb of lies. My eyes landed on the large abstract painting above the fireplace. Behind it was a biometric wall safe where Vance kept his most sensitive documents. My hand trembled as I pressed the keypad to wake it up. The old code was our anniversary. I didn't even bother with it. I punched in Bryn's birth date, the 12th of May 2098. The keypad beeped happily, the light turned green, and the heavy steel door clicked open, exposing the darkest recesses of human depravity. Inside, past the stacks of emergency cash and property deeds, a thick blue folder caught my eye. I pulled it out, my fingers flipping through the crisp pages. It was a life insurance policy underwritten by a major firm just 6 months ago. Insured. Calliope Miller. Sole beneficiary. Vance. Payout. $2 million in the event of accidental death. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, the folder slipping from my hands. The numbers blurred. $2 million. That was the bounty my loving husband had placed on my head. Suddenly, his recent caring behavior made sense. His insistence that I get the brakes checked on my car at a specific, shady mechanic he knew. His hyperfixation on the pilot light of our gas stove. He wasn't being protective. He was plotting an accident. But the nightmare didn't end there. Clipped to the back of the policy was a sheet of legal pad paper with Vance's frantic handwriting. It was a brainstorm list of accidents. Gas leak in kitchen. Brake fluid line on the mountain pass to the cabin. Hairdryer. Electrical short in the master bath. Each line was a razor blade across my retinas. He didn't just want a divorce. He didn't just want my assets. He wanted me erased from the earth so he could fund his new life and pay off the loan sharks with my blood money. Hot. Furious tears streamed down my face. I cried silently, the terror and disgust strangling my throat. Death had been hovering right beside me, wearing the mask of a loving husband. I looked around the sprawling bedroom, seeing his fingerprints everywhere, realizing every corner was a potential death trap. I knew I couldn't break down now. I had to survive. I had to rip myself from the jaws of this sociopath. And above all, I had to make him pay. I wiped my face, pulled out my phone, and photographed every page of the insurance policy and his handwritten murder plots. I carefully placed the folder back exactly as I found it and locked the safe. The click of the bolt was the sound of the final door shutting on any lingering shred of my humanity toward him. From this second on, Vance was no longer my husband. He was an apex predator, and I was going to skin him alive. At 8 p.m., I was sitting numbly over a cold plate of food when my phone vibrated. The screen flashed hubby with a FaceTime request. Nausea rose in my throat. I took a deep breath, slapped my cheeks to bring some color back, smoothed my hair, and hit accept. Vance's face filled the screen. He was bundled in a thick North Face parka, a wool scarf wrapped around his neck, and a beanie pulled down over his ears. He looked like he was standing in the freezing tundra. Behind him was a generic brick wall, with the faint sounds of traffic and muffled, unidentifiable background noise. He smiled that same radiant, warm smile that now looked like the grin of a demon. He spoke, a faint mist escaping his lips, likely a cheap camera filter or steam from the coffee he was holding. "Wifey, I miss you so much. It's freezing over here. A total freak sandstorm dropped the temps, and the AC in these buildings is built for summer. It's brutal." I stared intently at the screen. Despite his heavy winter gear, tiny beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. It was the middle of July in Seattle, and even with the penthouse AC blasting, wearing a down parka indoors was sweltering. I suppressed a dark laugh and feigned deep concern. "Oh no, bundle up. Please don't catch a cold. Beatrice is doing worse today. She keeps asking for you. It breaks my heart seeing you suffer all the way over there." Vance nodded, contorting his face into a mask of worry, though his eyes darted off-screen nervously, making sure Bryn couldn't be heard. "I know. Just take good care of Mom." The project here is at a critical phase. I can't fly back. How are you doing on money? Is the 50 grand enough? Money. It always came back to money. I knew he was drowning in debt, terrified I would empty the accounts or look too closely at the business ledgers. I cast my eyes down, my voice trembling with theatrical desperation. Vance, I actually need to talk to you about that. The specialist came today. He said Mom needs emergency surgery and a specialized imported drug regimen. The money you left won't cover a fraction of it. I was thinking, maybe we should sell the Mercer Island house to pay for her care. I could wire you whatever is left over for your investments. The house is way too big for just the two of us anyway. Through the screen, I watched raw, unfiltered panic explode in Vance's eyes. He nearly dropped his phone. His voice cracked loudly. Sell the house? Are you out of your fime? Tang mind. That's our crown jewel. You can't just sell it. We'll figure out Mom's treatments over time. I'll find the money and wire it. Do not touch that house. His reaction was far more violent than I anticipated. This house was his most valuable asset, his ultimate lifeline to leverage against the mobsters breathing down his neck. If I liquidated it, his entire financial house of cards would collapse instantly. I shrank back, pretending to be terrified by his outburst. But I'm afraid we won't have time. The doctor said if we don't act now, she might not make it. Plus, the real estate market is tanking. We should sell for cash now before the bubble bursts. Realizing he had broken character, Vance desperately tried to rein it in, forcing a sickeningly sweet tone. I'm sorry, babe. I'm just stressed from the time zone and the work. Please, don't make any rash decisions. Just let me think about it. I'll get back to you. I have to run to a board meeting. Love you. The screen went black. His sheer panic confirmed everything. He needed the house intact so he could sell it out from under me the moment I suffered my fatal accident. I set the phone face down on the granite counter. A chilling smile curled my lips. You want to keep the house? I'll sell it so fast it'll make your head spin. In a game of survival, the fastest trigger wins. Early the next morning, while the fog still hugged the lake, I called Sloan, an old sorority sister who was now a heavy-hitting luxury real estate broker in King County. I asked her to meet me at a quiet coffee shop in Ballard, miles away from the east side where Vance was hiding. Sloan arrived looking sharp, iPad in hand, but her expression morphed into pure shock when she saw my hollow, gaunt face, a stark contrast to the polished society wife she knew. I want to sell the Mercer Island estate. Immediately, I stated, skipping the pleasantries. Sloan nearly dropped her oat milk latte. Callie, what? That's a prime waterfront lot. Vance treated that place like a shrine. Why the fire sale? Is he on board? I took a sip of black coffee, staring out the window. Vance is stuck overseas. He signed over complete control of the assets to me. We need liquid cash. Right now. I spun a highly believable lie tailored to the current tech climate. Vance got mixed up in some unregulated offshore crypto funds. The margin calls are hitting. If we don't liquidate and pay it off, the feds and some very dangerous private equity guys are going to destroy us. I need this sold yesterday. I'll take a massive haircut on the price. I just need a cash buyer who can close escrow in 3 days. Sloan turned pale, her broker instincts warring with her sympathy. Oh my God, Callie. I'm so sorry. Okay, look. With that lot size and the custom finishes, if we price it $1 million under market, I'll have a bidding war of developers by noon. We listed the house for $2.5 million cash a steal that would trigger the greed of any vulture investor, and more than enough to give me a massive war chest to vanish and start over. Sloan immediately blasted the listing to her private whisper network of ultra-high net worth buyers. The title of the email blast: Distressed Seller, Mercer Island Waterfront. Deep discount for 3-day cash close. The news spread like wildfire. I knew with her connections, the rumor of our bankruptcy would eventually hit the ears of Vance's creditors, or Vance himself. By afternoon, my phone was blowing up. I approved a showing for that evening with a buyer represented by an LLC out of Delaware. In reality, the buyer was an associate of Thane, my PI friend. Thane had orchestrated the dummy corporation to act as the buyer, effectively washing the money and executing a flawless, legally binding transfer of the deed that bypassed any suspicion from Vance's camp. I needed to create a paper trail of utter desperation, making it look like I was liquidating everything in a panic. That evening, I walked the buyer through the house. I opened all the blinds, letting the dying sun expose every corner. I played the part of the tragic, ruined housewife perfectly. The buyer nodded, signed the paperwork on the spot, and wired a $200,000 non-refundable earnest money deposit directly to escrow. The closing documents were signed on the very same custom walnut dining table where Vance used to sit and paint fake pictures of our beautiful future. I looked at the signed contract, feeling zero remorse. I was selling my past, my memories, and my blind loyalty to buy my freedom. With the house locked in escrow, I drove to a sketchy strip mall in Renton and bought a burner phone and a prepaid SIM card. Sitting in the cold car, my hands trembled slightly. I didn't hate Bryn. My hatred for Vance consumed all the oxygen in the room. She was a victim too, just another naive pawn who thought she was securing a billionaire lifestyle, unaware she was just livestock being fattened for the slaughter. I pulled up the photos of the insurance policies from Vance's safe. Alongside my $2 million policy, there was a second one. Insured, Bryn Carter. Beneficiary, Vance. Payout, $1 million. The policy was initiated exactly 2 months ago, right when her pregnancy entered the second trimester. Vance didn't just want me dead. He had hedged his bets in case Bryn died in childbirth, or shortly after. He wanted the son, the money, and 0 women left to bother him. I typed a message on the burner phone and sent it to the number Thane had provided for Bryn. You think you're his true love? You're just a paycheck waiting to happen. Look closely at this before you start picking out nursery paint. I attached the photo of her life insurance policy, circling Vance's name as the sole beneficiary in bright red. I hit send. My heart hammered against my ribs. Less than 5 minutes later, the burner rang. I let it ring a few times before answering, staying dead silent. On the other end, a shaky, terrified young voice broke the silence. Hello? Who is this? Why? Why do you have this? She was hyperventilating, likely hiding in a hospital bathroom. I pitched my voice low and cold. Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is that you are in extreme danger. You think he loves you? He loves your youth, the baby in your stomach, and the $1 million he gets if you accidentally trip down the stairs or hemorrhage on the operating table. Look at the policy. It's an accidental death and dismemberment clause. If you die, he becomes a millionaire. Bryn was silent for a long time. Only her ragged breathing came through the speaker. The sound of a fantasy violently shattering. Then, she started to cry. No. No. Vance loves me. He's leaving his wife for us. You. You're his crazy, jealous wife, aren't you? Yes, I replied with an icy laugh. Believe what you want, but ask yourself, why did he secretly take out $1 million policy on you? Why does he hide his phone? I believed his lies too, and now I'm panic selling our mansion just to pay off the millions he owes to the mob. Wake up, little girl. Before you end up in a body bag. I hung up, popped the SIM card out, snapped it in half, and tossed it into a storm drain. The seed of paranoia was planted. Pregnant women are hormonally wired to be hypervigilant. Once she started doubting him, she would notice the cracks in his facade, the cold calculation in his eyes. And when 2 betrayed women operate on the same wavelength, the man caught in the middle is dead meat. The Seattle rain fell in thick, unrelenting sheets that night. I drove downtown to a high-rise office building to meet Judd, my old law school classmate who was now a ruthless, highly discreet divorce and asset litigation attorney. I walked into his plush office, took off my soaked trench coat, and dropped a massive, heavily encrypted flash drive onto his desk. The cost of those files was my entire adult life. Judd plugged it in. At first, his face maintained professional neutrality, but as he clicked through the PDFs, his jaw tightened. When he opened the $2 million life insurance policy and the handwritten murder checklist, Judd slammed his fist on the desk. Callie, you're married to a literal psychopath. His voice cracked with horror. He doesn't just want your money. He wants you dead. These scenarios, gas leaks, brake tampering, this is premeditated conspiracy to commit murder. I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop the shaking. I know. That's why I'm here. I want a divorce. But not yet. I need to sign an ironclad power of attorney, granting you full control to act on my behalf. I have to get out of this city, Judd. Every second I stay in that house, I have a target on my back. Judd nodded emphatically. Leave. Immediately. Go somewhere he can't track. I'll handle the legal nuclear fallout. With this evidence, the illegal prescriptions for the mother, the forged HELOC, the murder plots he isn't just going to lose in family court, I'm going to hand him over to the federal prosecutor. But you have to be safe first. We spent hours drafting the paperwork. I signed every page, the black ink feeling like I was finally excising a malignant tumor. Then, the most crucial step. The wire transfers. The $2.5 million from the house sale, which closed at lightning speed via Thane's connections, plus all my personal savings I had quietly drained from my individual accounts, were wired to a secure, anonymized offshore trust Judd had set up for me in the Cayman Islands. These were funds I had saved for 12 years for our future children. For retirement. Now, it was my survival fund. Seeing the transfer successful notification on my banking app, I felt a dizzying mix of profound relief and hollow grief. Those digital numbers were all that remained of a marriage. Judd walked me to the elevator, squeezing my shoulder. You're a survivor, Callie. Don't look back. I'll signal you when the dust settles. I stepped out onto 4th Avenue. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still a bruised purple. Up in the glowing skyscrapers, families were sitting down to warm dinners. I stood on the corner, alone and freezing, but I couldn't afford weakness. I was fighting a sociopath and a ticking clock. Back at the Mercer Island house, the sprawling chef's kitchen smelled of rich pot roast and buttery mashed potatoes, Beatrice's absolute favorite. I had cooked a grand feast, setting the table with our finest bone china and a fresh centerpiece of red roses. To an outsider, it looked like a loving family dinner. To me, it was the Last Supper, a farewell ritual to the illusion of my family. I wheeled Beatrice out of her room to the table. She was much more alert today, primarily because I had spent the last few days replacing Vance's toxic sedatives with crushed vitamin C. She eyed the feast, her eyes gleaming with gluttony, but her default setting was bitterness. Did you hit the lottery or something? She sniped. Why are we wasting money on a feast? The money Vance sends home needs to be saved. He's slaving away in the desert, and you're just sitting here burning through his cash. I smiled a smile that didn't reach my eyes and placed a tender slice of roast beef on her plate. Eat up, Beatrice. I slow-cooked it all afternoon. I wanted to celebrate that you're feeling more awake today. Beatrice scoffed, grabbed her fork, and began shoveling food into her mouth. Watching her eat with such aggressive entitlement, completely devoid of guilt, filled me with a deep, existential sadness. I had once viewed this woman as a surrogate mother. I bathed her, fed her, and cleaned her bedpans without a single complaint. When she had mostly finished, I set my fork down, looked her dead in the eyes, and asked calmly, Beatrice, I'm going to ask you one last time. Do you know where Vance is? Is he really in Dubai? Beatrice froze, a forkful of potatoes halfway to her mouth. She shot me a sideways glance, her eyes darting like a trapped rat. Then, puffing up her chest in faux outrage to mask her panic, she slammed the fork down. What kind of stupid question is that? If he's not in Dubai, where is he? He FaceTimed me. He said it was freezing in the AC. You're his wife, and you treat him like a criminal. You just spy on him. He provides this entire life for you. If you don't appreciate him, at least stop interrogating me. The lies flowed from her lips smoothly, without a micro-expression of shame. She was blindly protecting her son, discarding morality and truth. I looked at her, my disappointment crystallizing into absolute ice. She knew he was here. She knew about the mistress. She played along to the bitter end. And the most pathetic part? She didn't even know her golden boy was poisoning her every night to keep her compliant. I understand. I was just asking, I said softly, standing up to clear the plates. I already knew my answer, and I had already decided her fate. I wasn't going to leave her in this mansion. The new owner would literally throw her on the street tomorrow. But I wasn't taking her with me either. My days of being an unpaid hospice nurse for a monster were over. The rain resumed later that night, washing over the house in sheets. In the grand living room, under the glare of the crystal chandelier, the atmosphere was clinical. A representative for the LLC buyer, a stoic man with a briefcase, arrived to finalize the handover. He reviewed the signed deeds, authorized the release of the final escrow funds, and nodded. My phone chimed. The massive wire had cleared my offshore account. I signed the final handover protocol. The stroke of my pen felt like a scalpel slicing away dead flesh. Thank you, Miss Miller. You have 48 hours to vacate. We will be changing the locks and taking possession of the property at 8 a.m. on Monday, the rep said flatly, before walking out into the rain. I didn't sit down to mourn. Time was a luxury I didn't have. I called an aggressive estate liquidation company. I told them to come at dawn and take everything. The custom Italian leather sectional Vance bragged about to his frat brothers, the $10,000 espresso machine he valued more than my happiness. The surround sound theater system. I sold it all for pennies on the dollar to the liquidators. I wanted to scrub this house of his essence, to strip away the shiny toys he used to mask his hollow soul. Watching the movers haul everything into box trucks the next morning, I felt a savage, bitter triumph. The house echoed with emptiness. I walked the halls, running my fingers over the faded outlines on the walls where our wedding photos used to hang, photos I had systematically burned in the fireplace the night before. All the laughter, the tears, the memories that saturated this drywall were reduced to ash. I packed a single carry-on suitcase with clothes, my passport, and a framed photo of my late parents. That was the only thing in this house that truly belonged to me. I stood in the center of the cavernous, empty living room, staring out the massive bay windows at the churning gray waters of the lake. Tomorrow, this house belonged to a stranger. Tomorrow, my life belonged to me. I woke Beatrice up, dressed her in clean clothes, and packed her a small bag. She looked around the barren room, realizing the TV, the dressers. Everything was gone. Where did the furniture go? Have we been robbed? She shrieked in panic. I brushed her hair gently and lied with sociopathic ease. No, Beatrice. I sent it all to be professionally cleaned and stored. I'm taking you to a specialized medical spa today for some new treatments. And the house is getting a full remodel before Vance gets back. A surprise for him. Hearing her son's name and the promise of luxury, Beatrice's eyes lit up. She nodded, her greed overriding her confusion. I helped her into the wheelchair transport van I had hired. I had already sold my Subaru to a CarMax down the highway. The van pulled away from Mercer Island, the estate shrinking in the rearview mirror. Beatrice was practically humming, dreaming of what gourmet meals she'd demand at the spa, entirely oblivious that this was a one-way trip. The van pulled up to a grim, state-funded assisted living facility on the deep outskirts of Tacoma. It was cinder-block architecture, smelling faintly of bleach and boiled cabbage. I had paid out of pocket for exactly 1 year of care using a fraction of the house money, the bare minimum required by law, to avoid elder abandonment charges. I wheeled her into the stark intake lobby. Beatrice looked at the linoleum floors, the flickering fluorescent lights, and the heavily medicated seniors slumped in wheelchairs. Her face fell. This is a hospital? It looks awful. Why are there so many poor people here? It's a specialized rehabilitation center, Beatrice, I said briskly, kneeling beside her chair. My eyes locked onto her frail wrist, where she wore a heavy, antique sapphire and diamond tennis bracelet. It was a priceless heirloom left to me by my mother. On my wedding day, in a pathetic attempt to win my mother-in-law's love, I had let her borrow it. I never got it back. For 12 years, I received only coldness and exploitation in return. I reached out and firmly unclasped the bracelet. Beatrice gasped, yanking her arm back, her eyes flashing with venom. What are you doing? Are you robbing me? That is mine. I gripped her wrist with bruising force, staring dead into her cloudy eyes. My voice was glacial. This is my mother's legacy. I let you wear it for 12 years. I'm taking it back. You are not worthy of wearing it. I slid the sapphires off her wrist. The weight of the stones in my palm felt like salvation. Beatrice opened her mouth to scream, but the intake nurses hurried over, taking the handles of her wheelchair to roll her into the processing wing. She twisted her neck, her anger melting into raw terror when she realized I wasn't following her. I was walking toward the exit. Calliope, where are you going? Don't leave me here, Callie. Her desperate screams echoed down the sterile hallway. I didn't break stride. I walked out the sliding glass doors into the cool, damp air of freedom. No more chains. The The sapphire bracelet gleamed in my hand, proof that I had finally reclaimed my soul. I got into an Uber waiting at the curb. SeaTac Airport. Step on it, I told the driver. I looked down at my left hand. The pale indentation where my wedding ring used to sit was already fading. A year passed. Time flew when you weren't drowning in someone else's lies. Through the grapevine of old sorority sisters and Thane's periodic updates, I was able to piece together the glorious, catastrophic day Vance returned to Seattle, the day he thought he was making his triumphant, wealthy homecoming. It was a blazing hot July afternoon. An Uber Black pulled up to the familiar wrought iron gates of the Mercer Island estate. Vance stepped out, puffing his chest, presenting the mansion to Bryn like a king unveiling his castle. He wore a crisp linen suit, his hair slicked back, a fake Rolex gleaming on his wrist. He played the part of the triumphant international tech executive perfectly. Bryn stepped out holding their one-year-old son. Her face was heavily contoured with makeup, but it couldn't hide the deep exhaustion and paranoia etched into her features. She stared at the sprawling mansion, her eyes wide with desperate greed. Vance had spent the last 365 days promising her that she would soon be the lady of this manor, commanding a staff of maids. Vance confidently strode up to the front door and slid his key into the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. He frowned, jiggled it violently, and muttered a string of curses. He kicked the heavy oak door. The sound echoed loudly across the quiet, wealthy street. That crazy B times tetch, Vance sneered to Bryn, trying to mask his rising panic. She actually changed the locks to throw a tantrum because I didn't tell her my flight details. Don't worry, babe. I'm going to rip her a new one. Kick her to the curb, and we'll move right in. Bryn, clutching the crying baby, peered nervously through the front windows. The house was entirely empty. No furniture, no art, nothing. Vance laid on the doorbell, kicking the door so hard the neighbors started coming out onto their porches to watch the spectacle. He pulled out his phone to call me, screaming profanities into the voicemail of a number that had been disconnected for a year. He had no idea the woman he was cursing was currently sitting in a penthouse in Singapore. Suddenly, the front door swung open violently. But it wasn't me. It was a massive, heavily tattooed man in a tank top, holding a snarling 100-pound Rottweiler on a thick chain leash. The man glared at Vance, his voice a gravelly bark. "Who the hell are you? You got a death wish kicking my door like that?" Vance froze, all the blood draining from his face. He stumbled backward, stammering, Who? Who are you? What are you doing in my house? Where is Calliope? Where is my wife?" The tattooed man let out a booming, mocking laugh. "Your house? Are you high? I bought this place a year ago from an LLC. The deed is in my name. I don't know any Calliope. All I know is the crazy chick who sold it liquidated the place in 3 days and skipped the country." The words hit Vance like a freight train. He stood paralyzed. "You're lying. This is my property. I was overseas on a contract. She can't sell it without my signature. You're a squatter." The man didn't argue. He reached onto the entryway table, grabbed a photocopy of the deed, and shoved it into Vance's chest. "Open your damn eyes, buddy. It's notarized with both your signatures. The broker said you gave your wife power of attorney to sell it to pay off the mob. Now get off my porch before I let the dog off the chain." Vance stared at the document with trembling hands. Right next to my signature was his own perfect signature. His mind raced. He remembered a stack of routine LLC tax filings his shady lawyer had made him sign in a rush before he started his fake Dubai trip. His own lawyer had slipped the POA into the stack, knowing Vance's ship was sinking. Hearing this, Bryn felt her knees give out. The baby wailed in the heat. The paranoia I had planted in her a year ago fully bloomed into catastrophic reality. She snatched the deed from Vance's hands and began screaming at the top of her lungs. "You lied to me. You told me this was yours. You told me I was going to be rich. Where's the house? Where's the money? You broke loser." Bryn began slapping and scratching Vance's face right there on the manicured lawn. Screaming, crying, a barking Rottweiler, it was a tragicomic circus. The wealthy Mercer Island neighbors watched in absolute delight as the successful tech bro who used to brag at block parties was beaten by his mistress on the lawn of a house he no longer owned. Humiliated and bleeding, Vance was forced to drag Bryn and the screaming baby back into the Uber. Sitting in the car, nursing a scratched cheek, Vance had only a few $100s left to his name. The extravagant lifestyle he'd maintained to keep Bryn fooled had drained the last of his hidden crypto funds. Then, a desperate thought hit him like a lightning bolt. Mom. Calliope wouldn't dare abandon Mom. Mom knows where Calliope went. Mom knows where the money is hidden. He yelled at the driver to take them to the Tacoma Assisted Living Facility, an address I had texted him a year ago, which he had completely ignored because he was too busy playing house with Bryn. The Uber pulled up to the grim, depressing cinderblock building. It looked even worse in the summer heat. Vance burst into the lobby and demanded to see Beatrice. The exhausted receptionist looked at him with a mix of pity and disgust, flipping through a thick binder. "You're Beatrice's son? Why are you just showing up now? She waited by the door for you for months. The private funds your wife deposited ran out 3 months ago. We tried calling you, but the number was dead. She's been transferred to the state-funded Medicaid ward in the basement. She's not doing well." Vance's ears rang. He sprinted down the hallway toward the basement ward. The smell of urine and despair was overwhelming. There, parked in a rusted wheelchair facing a blank cinderblock wall, was his mother. Beatrice had withered away to nothing. Her hair was a wild shock of unwashed white. She wore a stained, threadbare hospital gown. Her eyes were vacant. Mom, it's me. Vance, I'm back." He fell to his knees in front of her wheelchair, sobbing. Beatrice slowly turned her head. Her cloudy eyes struggled to focus on the man in front of her. Vance waited for the warm, forgiving embrace of his mother. Instead, Beatrice's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Gathering every ounce of strength left in her paralyzed body, she raised her good hand and slapped Vance across the face with a loud crack. "You ungrateful bastard!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Where were you? You left me here to rot. Your wife sold everything and vanished. Why did you come back? Just to see if I was dead yet?" She wailed, the sound ripping through the dismal hallway. Vance knelt there, taking the abuse. Every hit from his mother felt like a physical manifestation of his own rotting karma. The worst punishment wasn't losing the money. It was the absolute hatred in his own mother's eyes. A nurse ran over to break them up, forcefully shoving a clipboard into Vance's chest. "Sir, you need to pay her outstanding balance. Pharmacy copays, specialized diapers, it's over $20,000. If you don't pay it by Friday, she's being transferred to a maximum capacity state ward." Vance looked at the bill. He didn't even have the money to pay the Uber waiting outside. Bryn, standing in the doorway holding the baby, watched the pathetic scene unfold. Her delusion shattered completely. The man she blew up her life for wasn't a billionaire. He was a destitute fraud drowning in debt. But the nightmare had only just begun. The next morning, Vance took a bus to his consulting firm in downtown Seattle, his empire. When he got off the elevator, he found the glass doors chained shut, plastered with bright red seizure notices from the IRS and the FBI. He stood frozen, reading the federal asset forfeiture notices, feeling the ground open up beneath him. "Before I left, I had mailed a massive encrypted hard drive to the SEC, the IRS, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. It contained irrefutable proof of his wire fraud, tax evasion, shell companies, and the forged HELOC. The numbers didn't lie. They coldly exposed a man who thought he could outsmart the federal government. Vance's burner phone rang incessantly. It wasn't venture capitalists. It was the loan sharks. His leveraged crypto bets had tanked, and the interest on his street loans had ballooned into the millions. They were hunting him. Vance ripped the battery out of the phone and threw it in a trash can, a cold sweat drenching his shirt. He returned to a squalid, roach-infested motel off Highway 99, where an enraged Bryn was pacing with a screaming baby. Seeing him walk in empty-handed, Bryn threw a soiled diaper at his head. "Nothing again? The baby hasn't had formula since yesterday. You said you were an executive. You said you had a mansion. Why are we living in a crack motel? Shut up! Shut up! My head is splitting." Vance roared back, his face twisting into the visage of a cornered animal. He lunged for Bryn's purse, tearing through it looking for cash to buy booze. Bryn screamed, trying to wrestle the purse away. They grappled in the cramped, mildew-smelling room. "That's the last $20 I had for baby food. I wish I never met you. You ruined my life," Bryn sobbed, holding her baby like a shield. Vance looked at his young, beautiful mistress, now gaunt, ragged, and filled with hatred for him. He suddenly burst into a manic, hollow laugh. He realized that without his money, the true love she promised was thinner than wet paper. He remembered me, his loyal wife who ate ramen with him in a studio apartment a decade ago, who stayed up nursing him through the flu. The belated, agonizing sting of regret crept into his soul, but it was quickly swallowed by sheer panic. One rainy evening, Vance was sitting hunched over the counter of a greasy spoon diner, eating a cheap plate of hash and eggs. He was eating like a starving dog, ignoring the disgusted looks of the waitress. Above the counter, a muted TV was playing a local Seattle news broadcast. Vance casually glanced up, and the fork slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the plate. On the screen was an elegant, aristocratic woman. She wore a tailored white blazer, her dark hair falling effortlessly over her shoulders. Her eyes radiated power and serenity. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Philanthropist and artist Calliope Miller returns to Seattle to launch multi-million-dollar arts foundation." It was me. The wife he thought had died in a ditch somewhere from poverty and shame. Vance rubbed his eyes, convinced he was hallucinating. The woman on the screen was light years away from the beaten-down, obedient housewife he remembered. I was speaking eloquently to the reporter about my new art exhibition, Resurrection, and my foundation for underprivileged youth. My voice was soft, but laced with a titanium authority. Vance looked down at his stained thrift store jacket, then back at the screen. The contrast was a physical blow. She's not dead. She's loaded, Vance muttered, reaching a shaking hand toward the TV as if trying to touch a ghost. He remembered the $50,000 he threw at me, remembered his own arrogance. Not only did I not break, I had risen to the stratosphere. His mind, forever infected by greed, began to spin. He thought of his massive debts, his pathetic existence. If I was this wealthy, and technically we were still legally married on paper, he was entitled to half. He spent the next 2 weeks frantically harassing my old colleagues and lawyers, blinded by greed, forgetting that a canyon of betrayal and hatred stood between us. Eventually, I agreed to meet him. Not at a romantic coffee shop, but in the sterile, heavily glassed conference room of Judd's downtown law firm. I sat at the head of the mahogany table in a $4,000 Street John suit, my back to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, idly spinning a Mont Blanc pen in my fingers. The door opened, and Vance shuffled in. He looked haggard, his eyes darting around the luxurious office, trying to hide his desperate hunger for my wealth. He tried to lunge forward to grab my hands, but 2 massive private security guards stepped in his path. He froze, forcing a pathetic, crooked smile. "Callie, you're back. I've been looking everywhere for you. Do you know how worried I was this past year? I thought you were dead." I'm so sorry, Callie." He launched into his rehearsed performance. Crocodile tears welled in his eyes. He sounded like a heartbroken husband. "I know I messed up with Bryn. It was a moment of weakness. She trapped me. She got pregnant on purpose to trap me. I've only ever loved you, Callie." I didn't say a word. I just calmly slid a thick, black binder across the polished wood. "Take a look, Vance." Vance's hands shook as he opened it. Inside were the photos of him and Bryn picking he had as baby clothes, the photos he had sent to his frat brothers bragging about his new life. There were bank statements of his offshore accounts, and most damningly, a photocopy of a forged psychiatric evaluation diagnosing me with severe schizophrenia. He had been planning to have me involuntarily committed to a psych ward to seize my assets if his accidental death plan failed. "You say you were trapped?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp as a scalpel. Who planned to have his wife locked in an asylum? Who took out a $2 million life insurance policy and Googled how to cut the brake lines on a Tesla? I asked the questions slowly, driving the knife into his most vulnerable spots. Vance went ghost white. The binder slipped from his hands, papers scattering across the carpet. He realized the woman sitting across from him wasn't his victim anymore. She was his executioner. I had the paper trail to put him in federal prison for the rest of his natural life. "Callie, please." "I'm sorry. I was out of my mind. The mob is going to kill me. You're so rich now. Just save me this one time. Just give me enough to pay them off, and I'll sign the divorce papers. I'll disappear." "You'll never see me again." Vance dropped to his knees, begging. Looking at his pathetic, sniveling form, I felt a wave of profound sorrow for my younger self. How could I have given my youth and my soul to such a worthless coward? I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and looked down at him. I'm not a charity, Vance. You reap what you sow. The federal government will handle your debts. I'm just here to watch you realize the exact price of your betrayal. Realizing his begging was useless, Vance's mask slipped entirely. He scrambled to his feet, his pleading eyes hardening into calculating malice. He had one last trump card. He sneered, a crooked, ugly smile on his sunken face. You're a cold B times tetch. Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's talk about the land, Vance snarled, slamming his hands on the table. That 500-acre plot in Montana your parents left you. The one out in the middle of nowhere. You thought I didn't know? I know the state just approved the new tech manufacturing zoning laws out there. That land isn't dirt anymore. It's a gold mine. It's worth tens of millions. I raised a single eyebrow, not in fear, but in sheer awe of his audacity. He had secretly appraised my family's land behind my back. He puffed his chest out triumphantly. Your parents died without a will, and you're the sole heir. But Washington is a community property state, Callie. Any increase in asset value during the marriage is split 50/50. You want a clean divorce? Cut me a check for half the value of that land, and I'll sign. If not, I'll drag you through litigation for a decade. I'll freeze your assets. Let's see how your fancy new foundation runs when you're tied up in court for the rest of your life. I stared at him, feeling bile rise in my throat. He didn't bung. Fomfrey. He didn't just want my money and my life, he wanted the sacred ground where I grew up. He wanted to strip mine my parents' memory. Are you finished? I asked, my tone dropping to absolute zero. Do you think I'm that stupid? Do you think I'd leave myself vulnerable to a parasite? I opened my briefcase, pulled out a certified document, and tossed it to him. Read the deed of trust, Vance. Specifically, the clause on the second page. Vance grabbed it. It was the deed to the Montana land. My parents didn't die without a will. They executed a highly specific trust before they passed, legally designating that land as a sole and separate premarital gift, shielded explicitly from any community property claims by a spouse. It is bulletproof. You can sue me until the sun burns out, and you won't see a single red cent. I locked eyes with him. You spent your whole life plotting, but you forgot one thing. My parents saw the rot in your soul from day one, and they protected me from the grave. You lost, Vance. A total shutout. Vance's eyes bulged as he read the legal jargon. His hands shook violently. The paper fluttered to the floor like a dying leaf. He stumbled backward, muttering, No, this can't be right. Greed had blinded him, driving him to weave a labyrinth of lies, only to find himself trapped in the center of it as the clown of his own tragedy. I pressed the intercom button on the desk. Security, escort him out. We're done here. The guards grabbed him by the arms, dragging him toward the heavy glass doors. Vance fought like a rabid dog, losing every shred of human dignity. His face turned purple with rage. He dug his heels into the carpet, screaming deranged, vile accusations. Don't pop the champagne yet, you sterile B times titch. Even if the land is yours, I'm still your husband. I won't sign the divorce. You'll never be free. I'll sue you for spousal abandonment. I'll ruin your reputation in the press. I sat completely still, twirling my pen, watching him like one watches an exhibit at a zoo. Seeing I wasn't reacting, Vance dug into the absolute gutter of his soul. He laughed maniacally. And don't forget the most important thing. You're a barren, defective woman. You couldn't give me an heir. But Bryn gave me a son. You have millions. As my legal wife, a judge will force you to pay alimony and child support for my kid. You're going to pay for my bastard son for the next 18 years. Judd, who had been silently observing from the corner, stepped forward, his face dark with fury, ready to intervene. I held up a hand, stopping him. I wanted to see how deep the abyss of his shamelessness went. Every month, you're going to wire Bryn $5,000 for child support and give me half your liquid cash. Agree to it, and I'll sign the divorce. Say no, and I'll go to the media and tell them the great philanthropist Calliope Miller is a jealous, barren monster who wants to starve a baby. I looked at him, and instead of rage, a genuine bitter laugh escaped my lips. This man, the man who had his mother secretly dose me with birth control for years so I would think I was infertile, who weaponized my deepest trauma against me, now had the audacity to demand child support for his affair baby. I stood up, walked slowly around the table, and stopped just out of his reach. I looked into his bloodshot, crazed eyes. Vance, do you really think you're in a position to negotiate? Do you think I'm still that naive girl who worshipped you? The tension in the room was suffocating. Only Vance's heavy, ragged breathing could be heard. I walked back to my laptop, tapped the trackpad, and opened an encrypted audio file. It was the weapon I never wanted to use, because hearing it still made my chest ache. But for a monster like Vance, only the nuclear option would shut him up. You want to sue me? Drag this out in the press? I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Fine. But before you walk out that door, listen to this. Listen closely. And remember exactly what you are. I hit play. A burst of static crackled through the speakers, followed by the distinct voices of two men. One was Vance. The other was the sleazy offshore attorney he had hired 5 years ago. Vance, this is highly risky. Your wife is never going to sign over that Montana land. It's her parents' legacy, the lawyer's voice echoed. Risky? She's a moron. She does whatever I tell her. Vance's voice laughed a cold, reptilian sound. If she won't sign, we just get rid of her. I already took out a $2 million accidental death policy. We just need a gas leak in the house, or I'll pay someone to snip the brake lines on her Tesla before she drives over the Snoqualmie Pass. Boom. I get the insurance payout, the community property, and I bring Bryn into the house. Easy. Vance's face, previously purple with rage, drained entirely of blood. He froze, his eyes bulging at the laptop speakers as if they were a loaded gun pointed at his head. He couldn't believe their secret conversation in a private VIP room of a strip club had been recorded. Turns out his sleazy lawyer, terrified Vance would throw him under the bus, wore a wire to protect himself. Thane had spent a small fortune tracking the guy down and buying the recording. I paused the audio. The silence in the room was absolute. I stared into Vance's soul. Did you hear that? This isn't a family court dispute anymore, Vance. This is irrefutable evidence of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, combined with the life insurance policy and Dr. Aris's sworn testimony about you poisoning your mother. What do you think a federal judge will say? You won't see a dime of my money. You're going to rot in a supermax prison. Your claim to any marital assets evaporated the second you planned my execution. Vance began to tremble violently. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the carpet. Sweat poured down his face. No, that's illegal. I was drunk. I was just talking big. I would never actually do it, Callie. You can't use that. His aggressive extortion crumbled instantly into pathetic panic. As Vance groveled on the floor, the heavy oak door of the conference room opened again. A thin, gaunt woman stepped into the light. It was Bryn. The once glamorous, arrogant mistress now looked like a shattered shell of a human being. Vance lifted his head, saw her, and a spark of desperate hope lit his eyes. Bryn, baby, tell them I never wanted to hurt anyone. Help me. But Bryn didn't run to him. She shrank back, hiding slightly behind the doorframe. There was no love in her eyes, only absolute terror and disgust. I nodded at her. Bryn took a shaky breath, stepped into the room, and placed a stack of papers on Judd's desk. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. I'm here to give a statement to the district attorney. I'm testifying against Vance for fraud and domestic violence. He didn't just lie to you, Calliope. He lied to me. Bryn turned to Vance, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. You said you loved me. You said we were going to have a perfect life, but you just used me as an incubator to get a son. Calliope showed me the life insurance policy you took out on me. You wanted to kill me too, didn't you? If I bled out in the delivery room, you were going to take the $1 million and run. You're the devil. Vance was stunned into silence. He never expected his ultimate prize, his loyal mistress, to turn state's evidence against him. He screamed, the veins in his neck bulging like thick ropes. You stupid B times tie. You believed her? I paid for your penthouse. I bought you everything. And you bite the hand that feeds you? He tried to lunge at her, but the guard slammed him back down into a chair. Bryn sobbed, pulling up her sleeves to reveal dark, fading bruises on her upper arms. Fed me? You beat me. Every time your crypto tanked, every time you got drunk, you used me as a punching bag. I stayed because I was terrified for my baby, but now that I know you plan to murder us both for insurance money, I'm done. Calliope saved me from you. I watched the scene with detached clinical interest. Two women, the wife and the mistress, who by society's rules should have been tearing each other apart, were now standing on the same side of the firing squad, dismantling the man who destroyed them both. Cornered, exposed, and betrayed by the woman he ruined his life for. Something inside Vance permanently snapped. He sat panting heavily, his bloodshot eyes darting around the room looking for an exit that didn't exist. The humiliation and total defeat ignited a psychotic break in his brain. Suddenly, Vance began to laugh. A high-pitched, hysterical cackle that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He jammed his hand into the pocket of his oversized thrift store jacket. "You want to put me in a cage?" he rasped, his voice unrecognizable. "You both conspired to ruin me." "Fine. If I have nothing left, neither do you. We all go to hell together." In a flash, he yanked out a Poland Spring water bottle. But it wasn't water inside. It was filled with a yellowish liquid. He bit the cap off and violently swung his arm, splashing the liquid across the mahogany table, over the legal documents, and splashing onto the hems of mine and Bryn's clothes. The sharp, overwhelming stench of gasoline immediately choked the air in the room. Bryn screamed, scrambling into the corner. Judd lunged forward, throwing himself in front of me, shouting, "Vance, you psycho! Drop it! Do you want to die?" But Vance was too far gone. His eyes were entirely black with madness. He pulled a silver Zippo lighter from his pocket. His thumb hovered over the flint wheel. "Don't move," he screamed, spit flying from his lips, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "I lost my company, my house, my money. Now you want to take my freedom? I'll burn us all alive. Let's see how pretty you look on TV with your face melted off, Callie." He flicked the wheel. A small orange flame sprang to life, dancing maliciously, just inches from the gasoline-soaked table. The fumes were so thick, I could barely breathe. But looking at him, I didn't feel the fear of death. I just felt a profound, exhausting pity. When a man is utterly consumed by greed, he becomes his own funeral pyre. Before Vance could drop the lighter, the frosted glass door of the conference room exploded inward. A tactical team of undercover Seattle PD detectives, who had been listening to the wire from the adjacent office via Judd's arrangement, swarmed the room like a tidal wave. Crack! A detective's baton swung down, shattering Vance's wrist. The Zippo flew from his hand, clattering harmlessly against the far wall and extinguishing itself on the carpet. Two massive officers tackled Vance to the floor, driving knees into his spine as he thrashed and screamed like a slaughtered pig. The heavy stench of gasoline mixed with the sharp tang of adrenaline and sweat. I sat completely still in my chair, gripping the armrests to hide the slight tremor in my hands. My eyes were fixed on the man pinned to the floor. Vance's face was mashed into the carpet, distorted by pain and humiliation. He craned his neck, looking up at me. The psychotic rage was gone, replaced by the pathetic, sniveling terror of a cornered coward. The loud click of steel handcuffs echoed in the room, binding the hands that had once held me, the hands that had signed away my life. "Vance Miller, you are under arrest for attempted murder, terroristic threats, wire fraud, and extortion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," the lead detective barked, reciting the epitaph of Vance's life. They hauled him to his feet. As they dragged him past my chair, his knees gave out again. He sagged against the officers, sobbing openly, snot running down his chin. "Callie, please. Please don't let them take me. Tell them I was just scaring you. I wouldn't have dropped the lighter. We were married for 12 years. You can't let me die in prison. I'll change. I swear to God I'll change," he wailed, begging for the mercy he never showed me. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my Street John skirt, and stepped slightly away from him. I looked into his weeping eyes, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Our marriage died the day you poisoned your mother's tea so you could sneak off to your mistress. It was buried the day you took out a policy on my life. If the police hadn't been here, we'd all be ash right now. Enjoy federal prison, Vance. Consider this your final lesson in consequence." The detectives dragged him out. His pathetic wails faded down the hallway and vanished behind the elevator doors. Bryn sat collapsed in the corner, sobbing into her hands in sheer relief and horror. A week after Vance's arrest, I received a call from the state-funded nursing home. Beatrice's condition had rapidly deteriorated. Even though I had severed all ties, the ghost of the 12 years I spent calling her mom compelled me to visit her one last time. The Tacoma facility was gloomy under a relentless autumn downpour. I walked down the dim linoleum hallway. The smell of antiseptic and impending death tightened my chest. Beatrice lay curled in a fetal position on a narrow, uncomfortable bed. Her rail-thin arms were bruised purple from IV lines. Hearing my heels click on the floor, she struggled to open her eyes. Those milky eyes, which had always looked at me with such fierce judgment, now held nothing but abject terror and crippling loneliness. She already knew Vance had been indicted on federal charges and denied bail. The shock of losing her golden boy was the final blow to her failing heart. Seeing me, she tried to lift herself. Her trembling hand reached out, but quickly dropped back to the sheets, paralyzed by guilt. Her voice was a dry, raspy wheeze. "Callie, you came. I thought you hated us. I thought you'd never look at me again." I sat in the plastic visitor's chair next to her bed. I didn't take her hand. I just placed a small basket of grapes on the tray table. "I came to pay your final medical balances. And to say goodbye. I'm leaving the country soon. I probably won't be back. Try to eat. The nurses said if you accept the feeding tube, you might have some time left." Beatrice weakly shook her head. Tears leaked from the corners of her wrinkled eyes. "I don't have long. This is God's punishment for what we did to you." "I am so sorry, Callie." Suddenly, she grabbed the sleeve of my blazer. Her grip was surprisingly tight, her voice urgent and choked with tears. "Child, do you know why you could never get pregnant all those years? It wasn't your fault. It was mine. My fault." My heart stopped. The blood rushed to my ears. I froze, a chill radiating outward from my spine. Beatrice sobbed, confessing the grotesque, monstrous truth she had buried for a decade. "Years ago, I went to a psychic in the International District. She read my tea leaves and told me you had a dark aura. She said if you ever bore Vance a child, a curse would transfer to him and he would die young. I was so terrified of losing my boy, so every morning, when I made your green tea, I crushed up birth control pills and stirred them in. For 10 years. Forgive me, please. I was so cruel. The ground dropped out from under me. My years of silent agony. The endless, humiliating fertility clinic visits. The deep, agonizing self-hatred for feeling like a broken woman. It was all manufactured, orchestrated by this superstitious, narcissistic woman to protect her son. She stole my right to be a mother, based on the ramblings of a strip mall psychic. I stared at her. The slight pity I had felt walking into the room vanished, incinerated by a blinding, white-hot hatred. I stood up violently, ripping my sleeve from her grasp as if she were made of acid. I wanted to scream, to flip the bed over, to wrap my hands around her throat. But looking at her rotting, miserable body, I realized words were useless. The ultimate punishment wasn't screaming at her. It was letting her die completely alone, suffocating under the weight of her own sins. I took a deep breath, swallowing the acid in my throat, and looked down at her with eyes like obsidian. "Don't worry, Beatrice. I won't sue the estate. I'm going to leave you right here to spend your final days agonizing over the monster you raised and the lives you destroyed. The check at the front desk is my final act of charity. Burn in hell." I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't look back as her desperate, wet sobs were swallowed by the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. The day of Vance's sentencing, the Seattle sky was uncharacteristically clear and brilliant blue. I sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse in a pristine white sheath dress. My heart was as still and calm as a glass lake. Vance stood at the defense table, his head bowed. His hair was buzzed short, the oversized orange jumpsuit making him look small, pathetic, and weak. He didn't dare look at the gallery, not at me, and not at Bryn, who sat in the witness row, her eyes swollen from crying. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar violence, read the verdict in a booming, monotonous voice. Wire fraud. Forgery. Aggravated assault. And the heaviest charge, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Every word was a nail in the coffin of Vance's freedom. Bryn had accepted a plea deal, turning over all Vance's encrypted devices and testifying to his abuse and his murder plots, which handed the U.S. attorney an airtight case. The defendant, Vance Miller, acting out of extreme malice and greed, orchestrated a systemic campaign to defraud and ultimately terminate the life of his spouse, the judge declared. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. The strike of the gavel echoed like a gunshot, executing the final judgment on a man whose greed knew no bounds. Vance's knees buckled. U.S. Marshals had to haul him up by his armpits to keep him from collapsing. As they dragged him toward the holding cell door, he twisted his head around. His eyes met mine one final time. They were begging, shattered, filled with the absolute terror of the hell that awaited him. I gave him nothing. Not a smile, not a sneer, just a blank, dismissive stare. Court was dismissed. I walked out onto the plaza, the warm Pacific Northwest sun kissing my skin. Bryn hurried down the marble steps behind me, holding her toddler on her hip. She called out hesitantly, "Calliope?" I stopped and turned. I know an apology doesn't fix anything," Bryn stammered, looking down at the pavement. "But I am truly sorry. I'm taking my son and moving back to my parents' farm in Iowa. I'm going to work in the diner there. I want to raise him as far away from this city and his father's legacy as possible." I looked at the young woman, another casualty of Vance's war, and gave a small, genuine nod. "Go back to Iowa, Bryn. Start over. The boy is innocent. Raise him to be a good man, so he doesn't inherit his father's rot." I reached into my designer bag and handed her a thick white envelope. It wasn't millions, but it was enough cash to buy a reliable used car and secure a decent apartment in the Midwest until she got on her feet. Bryn burst into tears. She bowed her head in profound gratitude, clutching the envelope to her chest, and walked away. Watching her fade into the downtown crowd, I felt a massive, crushing weight lift off my chest. 12 years of resentment, lies, and trauma were boxed up and buried under the marble floors of that courthouse. Judd walked out, adjusting his tie, and handed me a manila folder containing the judge's final decree. "Congratulations, Callie. The divorce is finalized. You are entirely free. The assets are yours. You are Calliope Sterling again, independent and unburdened." I took the thin, incredibly heavy piece of paper. The corners of my mouth curled into a true, radiant smile. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was a boarding pass to a new life, one I was going to live loudly, beautifully, and entirely for myself. The first morning of my true freedom, I woke up before the city shook off its morning fog. I walked out onto the terrace of my temporary luxury rental in downtown Seattle, holding a mug of steaming chamomile tea. I took a deep breath of the crisp, salty air coming off the Puget Sound. Below me, the ferries carved white wakes through the dark blue water, their horns sounding low and peaceful in the distance. I thought back to 12 years ago, standing on the shores of this very water. I was a young, starry-eyed girl who believed in unconditional sacrifice and eternal love. I bled my youth dry to build a kingdom for someone else, only to be thrown to the wolves. But standing here now, I didn't feel any pain or bitterness. The trauma was like an old surgical scar. It reminded me of what I survived, but it no longer bled. My phone chimed on the patio table. An email notification. It was a formal invitation from the International Arts Council, inviting me to headline a solo exhibition in Singapore next month. My collection, Resurrection painted through tears and epiphanies during those long, lonely nights, had stunned the board of directors. It wasn't just validation of my talent. It was a door swinging wide open into a world where I could breathe my own passion. A passion I had suffocated for a decade under the weight of being a good wife. I took a sip of tea. It tasted like pure honey. I looked out at the horizon where the sun was burning through the Seattle gray, painting the clouds in explosive strokes of gold and violet. Life, much like the ocean below, can be violent, turbulent, and full of hidden monsters. But eventually, the storm breaks. I thought I had lost everything, but by cutting the dead weight loose, I inherited the entire world. I walked back inside and began packing my Rimowa starret for the trip. This wasn't a desperate flight into the rainy night to escape Zampa killer. I would carry the lessons of the thunderstorms with me, so I could truly worship the sun. There would be more challenges ahead. Maybe I would love again, or maybe I would rule my empire in proud solitude. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had found the woman in the mirror, a woman who loved herself fiercely, and who would never, ever bow her head to fate again. The sun crested the skyline, and my life began right now.